So first off, good morning and welcome, members of the board, members of the public, and DOJ staff. We have a lot to get through today. We have an updated draft with some recommendations that we hope to vote on. So I'm going to move us along, and we'll start with introductions. I'm John Dobard, Vice President of Policy and Programs at Catalyst California, and a designee of Speaker Emeritus Anthony Rendon. I will pass it to my colleague, Angela Sierra, to introduce.
Good morning. Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. I'm Angela Sierra. I'm an attorney with the California Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Enforcement Section, and I'm Attorney General Rob Bonta's designee on the board. Let's see, I will turn it over to, I don't have a, let's see, Sheriff Bianco.
Good morning, Chad Bianco, Riverside County Sheriff on behalf of California State Sheriff's Association.
And would you like to pass it to someone, Board Member Bianco?
I'm sorry, yes, I keep hitting mute and screwing everything up. The first person that's popping up on my screen is Lily. So Lily, go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Lily Kajabi, and I'm a professor of mathematics at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles and an appointee of the Attorney General's office. And I want to apologize in advance. I'm traveling for Memorial with family, and I'm going to have to leave our meeting early today, but it's an important meeting. It was great to see the draft of the report, and I'm happy to join you all today. Thank you. Oh, and let me pass it on to Board Member Dobard. May I pass it back to you?
And I will ask Board Member Kazi to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amina Kazi. I'm a new board member. This is my first policy subcommittee meeting, and I am the co-executive director of the Peace and Justice Law Center. I'm a civil rights attorney and was designated to be here by Attorney General Rob Bonta. And I believe there's another board member on camera, Souley Diallo.
Yes, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Souley Diallo. I'm a supervising deputy public defender for the Riverside County Public Defender's Office. I'm a board member and appointee of the California Public Defenders Association. I'm newly appointed. I'm looking forward to serving on the board, and I'm looking forward to participating today.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us. I will ask Board Member Kulkarni.
Hi, good morning. Apologies, having some technical difficulties, so I cannot be on camera. Manju Kulkarni, Executive Director of AAPI Equity Alliance and co-founder of Stop AAPI Hate, was nominated by former Speaker Anthony Rendon. Thanks.
And Board Member Guerrero.
Good morning, everyone. I'm having trouble keeping my camera on. I'm going to try to switch to another computer, but it's good to be here. I am Andrea Guerrero, the Executive Director of Alliance San Diego, and I am an appointee of Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's everyone. Is there any board member that I missed? No? Okay, I'm going to move us on to approval of the minutes, but before I do that, I do want to formally recognize and introduce Board Member Diallo. He said a few things about himself, but I will say a few words. Board Member Diallo is a new designee for the California Public Defenders Association. He served as a deputy public defender for the Riverside County Public Defender's Office since 2006 and has represented clients in every type of criminal case, trying over 100 cases to verdict. He's been recognized by his office with Trial Attorney of the Year and Public Defender Awards. He currently serves as a supervising deputy public defender and the training supervisor, administering the office's training and law clerk programs. So again, welcome to you, Board Member Diallo. Happy to have you join the Policy Subcommittee. Is there anything else you'd like to say about yourself before we move on?
Other than I'm really looking forward to serving and learning actually kind of more about the work of the committee, but I'm very excited and thank you for the introduction.
Great. Okay, so we will now move on to approval of June 5th subcommittee meeting minutes. Please take some time to review those if you haven't already done so, and when ready, I invite a motion to approve.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second that
Thank you.
motion.
Thank you.
Right. We'll now take a vote on the motions and we will go in alphabetical order. Board Member Bianco,
Yes.
Board Member Diallo,
Yes.
Board Member Dobard,
Aye.
Board Member Guerrero,
Aye.
Board Member Kajavi,
Aye.
Board Member Kulkarni, Board Member Kulkarni. Come back. Board Member Kazi,
As I was absent, I'm going to abstain.
Board Member Sierra,
Yes.
the ayes have it. Well, let's go back to Board Member Kulkarni. Okay. Board Member Kulkarni is having some difficulty. The ayes have it. Thank you. The minutes are approved.
Thank you. Okay, we will now move on to a discussion of the policy section of the 2025 draft report. And we are going to break this up into two sections. The first part, we will hear from DOJ. DOJ will start with an overview. And then after that, depending on how long that takes, if it takes quite a bit of time, we'll take a break and then reconvene and discuss. But if it doesn't take up too much time, then we will discuss and then maybe take a break. And then if we still have more to discuss, we'll reconvene and discuss after the break. So for now, I will turn it over to DOJ to provide an overview of the draft section.
Thank you, Dr. Dobard, and good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Simpson. I am Deputy Attorney General and one of the Deputy Attorneys General that is responsible for drafting this year's report. I really want to thank everybody for everybody's commitment to this important subcommittee. And I'd like to go over, just for the benefit, I know this is a very long report, so I wanted to give just a very brief outline in the event that folks haven't had an opportunity to read through the entirety of it or just wanted to get an overview. So essentially this report, this policy section, the chapter, on policies is split up into 4 main areas. There is first an overview of the research into policies relating to police interactions with youth. So this is found in sections 1A and 1B, pages 1 through 9. So these sections were partially developed, these sections, section 1A and section 1B were partially developed and partially in place during the last meeting, but this has been fleshed out more after the comments from the board at the last subcommittee meeting and from additional research in this space. So while we're talking about this chapter, for the purposes of this chapter, we are looking at youth as defined as and inclusive of transition age youth, which the federal government defines as persons between 16 and 24 years of age. So when we're talking about youth interactions with police in this chapter, we're looking at 0 to 24. And that discussion is found on page 3 of the report. So as we discussed in the last subcommittee meeting, there is research in this area that shows that youth are uniquely impacted by law enforcement encounters. And that research, the discussion on that research begins on page 4. So nationally, researchers have found police encounters with racialized youth are often qualitatively different from those interactions with white youth. Youth of color are more likely to live in areas with a high law enforcement presence, and they're more likely to interact with police officers generally. Research has also found that youth of color are also likely to be perceived as significantly older and perceived as more likely to be guilty or dangerous than white children of the same age. And this process, which is known as adultification, has been researched. That research appears on pages 5 to 6 of this draft. Research shows that negative police encounters could have a harmful impact in a child's life. And the earlier this negative experience occurs, the more harmful that impact is likely to become. And in fact, research shows that any interaction with police, any interaction, including just being stopped by the police, could have long-term consequences on youth, including higher levels of law violating behavior and fewer educational and employment opportunities. So we've included a number of studies in this area, and we describe both the conclusions of these studies and in some cases the studies themselves in this portion of the report. So before I move on, are there any questions about this first area regarding the research? Okay, seeing and hearing none. Second area that we looked at is an analysis of 2023's STOP data in various different respects as related to youth interactions with police. So this is found in section 1C, and that's pages 10 to 45 of this draft. And as you can see, this is the largest portion of this chapter. So specific looking and analysis of 2023's STOP data in various different aspects of youth interactions with police. We looked at 7 specific offenses common to police interactions with youth. We looked at loitering, pedestrian roadway violations, disturbing the peace, trespassing, vandalism, status offenses, and underage drinking. So, and that's found on pages 13 to 26. So looking at those specific offenses, which are common to police interactions with youth, as you can see from the report, there were racial differences in the proportions of stops of youth that officers reported for these common youth offenses. We also looked at specific actions taken by officers during stops. That starts around page 30, including the use of force, curbside or patrol car detentions, consent searches, and photographing of youth. And that appears, that portion of the report appears pages 30 to 39. We looked at these areas, the actions taken by officers during stops, because those actions and the data can inform how bias may impact the actions an officer takes during a stop, and the need to address any detrimental effects of those actions on youth. As to actions taken by officers during stops, the data shows that there were racial, disability, and gender disparities with regards to youth. We also looked at the results of stops, including the use of field interview cards and entry into CalGang. Again, this data helps to illuminate how bias could impact an officer's decisions during a stop, and how those decisions can impact racial and ethnic groups more often when compared to white youth. We did find there were racial disparities in the law enforcement agencies' designations of youth as suspected gang members, associates, or affiliates in CalGang. And there were also racial disparities in the use of field interview cards with regards to youth. So that second area, looking just at police interactions with youth in the 2023 stop data. Any questions about that section?
Alex, this is Andrea. I think I was able to get my camera to work, so yay. Tremendous work here in this section. There is a graph on page 15. I'm scrolling back up to it, that I wonder if perhaps there might have been an error in the graph. It shows 100% citations for Hispanic, Latine individuals, but does not show lowering citation figures for any other ethnic group. So I didn't understand, perhaps I didn't read the graph right, but I thought that maybe you might want to check the accuracy of that graph.
I do see that graph, and we certainly will check that. Thank you.
Great. And then just a general comment, the section on use of force and the associated data was, quite frankly, it was stunning. And I don't think we have seen these figures before and had a real appreciation for the scale of use of force against children, really. And I just wanted to call that out, and it's absolutely stunning, and we can build on that for recommendations. But really appreciate the work that went into this section in particular.
Thank you. Any other questions, thoughts before moving on to the third area of the report? And thank you for that. Yes, Member Randolph, I see your hand is up.
Alex, thank you. Quite a bit of information that was thrown out. I'm a lot to take in. I just wanted to throw out, when we talk about stats and the data when it comes to youth, there's a difference when we talk about children, because children's defined as the prior age of puberty. And if you look at the numbers here, we're actually talking about, it's all across the board, but so that's not including all children when it comes to use of force. I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions regarding this second area? Board member. Oh, I apologize.
No, please proceed.
Oh,
I do have a comment, but I don't know if you're going to respond to Member Randolph.
Just very briefly, I apologize with regards to Board Member Randolph's comment. Yes, we had, as I had said previously, we had been looking at use of force that would include transition age youth as defined by the federal government, which is up to the age of 24. The appendix will have the breakdowns of various different age categories. So younger age categories will also be reflected in the appendix. They're not reflected in this portion of the report. So I hope that answers your question. And I apologize, Dr. Dobard, for cutting you off.
No worries at all. I have a edit. It's a minor one. Would you like those posed now or after you've gone through all of the sections?
No, sure. Let's hear. Thank you.
So very minor edit on page 27. This is the first sentence that begins national research shows. So that sentence, the 83 there, I assume is the footnote. So it should be superscript text.
I see that and I have noted it. All right. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts, comments, questions about this second area of the report? Yes, board members here.
Yes, thank you. On the use of force, I too was really, kind of also agree how important that section is and was stunned by those numbers. Also, I thought the part in the report where talked about actions after the stop and the disparities in those areas, I think is critically important for our report. So I really thank you all for working on those stats. On the use of force, and I'm not sure if it's in the report yet or will it be woven in. I think the public would benefit from either a short explanation, either probably in the body of how we are defining use of force. And because I think we may all have this understanding, but I'm not sure if all the readers of our report will have that, and kind of what the parameters are of that term of art. And then I was also wondering if in our appendix will there be additional stats as to breaking that down into what types of use of force are we seeing the greatest disparities?
Thank you for that. In response to both of those questions, the answer is yes. We can certainly add term of art definition for the use of force in the draft, and the appendix will have breakdowns of various different types of use of force, and also broken down by age category as well.
Great, thank you.
May I piggyback on that? So it was, first of all, thank you. It's tremendous work. And I apologize. I just jumped in and I didn't, I see a hand up. I don't know, Board Member Kazi, if you had your hand up earlier. Should I just continue for now and then are you?
Yeah, continue. I raised my hand after you started. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. So tremendous research, and I really appreciate the work that was used, that was cited as background, that really helps us better understand the experience of youth. This section now, I know that I was going to say that the data subcommittee met separately, and there's a section that has a tremendous march of graphs and various breakdowns, and this will be an opportunity, I think, for some of us to revisit afterwards that section to see how they can better intertwined. And the points that were just raised about breaking down a little bit more specifically within the age ranges, and also describing more explicitly what use of force constitutes. I know that some of that is already in the data section, but this will be a chance to swing. The report will be a chance to swing back to that section in light of this work, maybe, and amplify that. I wanted to make one comment about the section. There's a brief section on searches. It's narrative, but it really comes out there that there's, unfortunately, is a very important finding, a really tremendous disparity of really Black and brown youth being many times more likely to be subjected to a search. And given that kind of action really changes the tenor of a stop, and with the evidence that we have that these interactions with youth can have negative spillover effects long after the stop. I want to invite in that section, even though we have many graphs throughout the report, that might be a place where capturing the data visually actually conveys the meaning more directly, at the same time keeping the narrative where we really have the numbers laid out, and we can see also the size, how many thousands actually of youth are affected by this every year. So that was just highlighting. It says on page 37, section D, which is brief now and maybe actually could be extended to highlight that. Let me stop there and pass on to Board Member Kazi. Thank you.
Sure, and I can wait if Mr. Simpson has any response or follow-up to that.
Just thank you, Board Member Kajabi. I've written this down as furiously as I could, and I will make sure that the notes are taken just as all of these notes are. This is all very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I also echo, like, this is such a tremendous effort, and for those of us who work in the field, it's still so eye-opening in so many ways. My question and comment is about the proactive policing, both in the narrative section, and it's not mentioned in the data section, but that's what my question is about. So just first, as a small note, I think the first time that proactive policing is mentioned, I think on page 7, it would be good to have at least a footnote or some sort of definition of what proactive policing is. And then I think the narrative, the research on proactive policing, like I said, is so eye-opening and so informative. But when it comes to the data, especially when we talk about reasonable suspicion, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there could be many proactive policing encounters that do not arise to the level of reasonable suspicion and maybe are not collected and are not reported. And so I think if that is the case, then I think that would be a critical kind of connection between that research portion and the data portion, to at least say this data that we have, all these instances, does not even touch upon all of the proactive policing encounters that may be in the field. And so all that research that you have about the negative effect of proactive policing, especially on youth, is not necessarily reflected in the data portion of the report.
Thank you. I mean, you are correct, Board Member Kazi, that the only information that the data captures is stops. So if it doesn't rise to the level of the stop, then it's not going to be present in the data. That's correct.
If I could jump in and underscore the point that Board Member Kazi made, I think, a narrative that that makes clear that there may be a gap between the data and what's happening in the field, I think would be very helpful to convey to the public. I also wanted to add to what Board Member Kajabi stated around searches. And I think not only is it going to be important here to have information about, or a graph on searches, but a breakdown of warrantless searches. So those are the searches based on consent and based on supervision. And I think that's particularly important because later in the report, we make recommendations around consent and search and supervision searches. We reiterate a recommendation we've already made, and then we deepen the recommendation. So having information, having a graph here about searches and consent searches and supervision searches for youth would be very helpful.
Thank you. Board Member Randall.
Thank you so much. I just had a question, Alex, as Member Guerrero pointed out, like also looking at some additional data. Have you considered putting the data in there as far as an arrest? What the disposition was after the handcuffs were placed? This has been talked about on different panels. I've brought it up, and I know DOJ has taken into consideration. They were looking at it, but I'm seeing a lot of data here we've thrown out. if I put handcuffs on a student or even a youth, okay, what happened? Did the handcuffs get taken off? Or were they taken to a mental health facility? Were they taken to juvenile hall? Were they, that's what I'm just asking. Is that data that we're going to start looking into as well? Or do you have that ability to do that? Was an arrest made?
Thank you. And I think you had mentioned that at the last subcommittee meeting as well. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, I
do remember.
sure did.
Can I just ask for some clarification so I'm sure that we're understanding the request? Chief Randolph, is that a request for an analysis specifically of stops in which handcuffing occurred for the outcomes of those stops?
Yes.
Thank you.
Alex, is that kind of, you kind of look stumped. Let me give you a scenario, and for members of the board. So when a peace officer gets a call, I'll take it out of the schools because I usually am focused on the schools. So a peace officer or deputy sheriff gets a call of a possible crime and robbery, and they show up, and there's 5 juveniles there, and one of them matches the description, okay? One of them possibly has a weapon. That officer, that deputy can't decide who has a weapon, or even if these students are involved, or I'm sorry, these children, youth, wow, are involved. But they show up and they see 5 individuals, no matter what their race is, they're still in the area and they match the description. 2 or 3 of them might be placed in handcuffs, okay, just for safety reasons. As we talk about consensual, yeah, you can place me in handcuffs, and the officer or the deputy does the investigation, okay, find out that they're not involved. Okay, we get the victim who had their cell phone stolen, or we get the clerk who had a gun pointed at their head, and we get them out there and they look and say, no, deputy, they were not involved. Okay, all right. But they were placed in handcuffs for safety reasons. And because 1 or 2 of them they were not happy with their contact, but one of them was like, hey, let's just go with the program. Handcuffs are off. That's a RIP entry all day long. Handcuffs were placed. That data gets put in to whatever that agency is. That data goes to DOJ, and DOJ grabs that data. There's handcuffs. Boom. Okay. Let me give you another scenario. All right. This is my scenario here. I'm at a high school. I have a student that has threatened to hurt people. Okay. He or she is having issues at this time. We go into an office and he or she grabs a pencil and starts trying to stab individuals in the office. This is a small office with a counselor, an assistant principal, and now me. Handcuffs are placed on that student. Okay. And we wait and we try and hold on to them, calm them down, de-escalate until behavioral health gets there, which behavioral health goes, we're not going to transport him or her because it's beyond our capability. So we go ahead and we transport them to a hospital where they could get treatment. That's a RIP entry. That's handcuffs. So I'm just wondering, this data needs to kind of be clarified because it looks like we're just throwing handcuffs on all these individuals. I gave you a school element. I gave you a non-school element. Alex, is that kind of, I see you kind of understand where I'm going with that? Okay. So at the end of were handcuffs taken? What was the disposition? That's all I'm asking. Okay. I know California peace officers are not placing handcuffs on students or youth all the time. And this data looks like we're doing it all the time. And what was the disposition? Because 9 times out of 10, chances are they're going to be reunified with their family, or we're going to get them services, or I don't really think they're going to go to juvenile hall because we don't do a lot of that anymore. But yeah, that's what I just want to know. It just leads it. Oh, it explains the data with these handcuffs. That's all.
I apologize if I had a quizzical expression on my face. I think I understand your ask. Sometimes the way my face is somewhat quizzical, and that's not intentional. I apologize. Board member Bianco.
Thank you. I just wanted to add just one comment to what he was saying, and I think right at the end, after I put my hand up, he kind of clarified it. He didn't clarify it. He just added a little bit more. But I'm just going to say that in these specific examples, this is everyday work of a law enforcement officer, and I will tell you unequivocally with it, and I will be conservative and go under. I would say that in my 30-year career, 90% of the time that I put handcuffs on someone, they got taken off and they walked away. The handcuffs are, especially in the scenario with one cop with 5 people that are either maybe combative, maybe bigger, especially bigger, which is usually the case. And it's easily explained, but that doesn't go into data where you say, because I'm going to tell you the exact words are, look, we're not going to fight here. We're not going to, there's 5 of you. I'm going to put handcuffs on you. You're going to sit here. You're not guilty. We're going to let you go. But the de-escalation is, we don't want this to go physical. And I will tell you, always, they always say, okay. So we put handcuffs on, and then we do everything we're doing. The store clerk says, no, that's not them. You take the handcuffs off, you brush them off. Thank you guys, appreciate it, or gals, whatever the case may be. And they know everything that's happening. But that's the problem with data, is the data doesn't know where that came from. The data knows that any data would say that there are certain racial backgrounds that have more, that heart attacks are prevalent, but it doesn't say why. It doesn't say what led to that. And certainly heart attacks aren't racist and aren't biased in who they affect. So when we're doing these, when we're grabbing all of this data without the context, without the finish, and just saying, oh my gosh, use of force because handcuffs protect not only the officer or the deputy, but the people that we're dealing with also. So it wasn't just last meeting he brought up the issue of the data being included because of rest. It's been from the very beginning. We've been repeating this over and over, that while we all have good intentions, the data that we're pulling, and DOJ has even admitted to me, which makes me frustrated, that years later that the data is so flawed in how we're even getting it, that we have to put an asterisk at the end that says our data is all flawed. So I get it, but there's something, instead of just saying, yeah, we get it, there's got to be something that we do to clarify it, to make it better known, or to understand, so everybody understands that just simply saying handcuffs is a use of force, but we don't know why, we don't know what it was, and we don't know how it ended, it implies something afterward. The same as what you're saying about appendix. I will tell you, I read a lot of books. I don't read appendixes ever unless I don't understand the definition of a meaning. So no one is going to read an appendix, and especially for the word children. We all know what children is. So we're not going to, words mean things. And if we're calling them children when they're not, we're implying to everyone that they are, and no one is going to go to an appendix that, yeah, you covered yourself in the end and said this is what it really means, but no one looks at that because we all know what a child is. So, and that's all. Thank you.
Board Member Sierra, before you speak, I just want to address a comment made by Chief Randolph and further developed by Sheriff Bianco. In terms of the RIPA stop data, there is a narrative field that allows officers to explain the reason, the cause for the stop, any actions that are taken. So there is an opportunity for officers to provide context for the use of force in the form of handcuffing. So it's not simply a data element with no context provided, or no opportunity to provide context. So there is that opportunity on the form. And with that, I will turn it over to Board Member Sierra.
Thank you. Just a couple things, and listening to this discussion, I think the benefit, the report could benefit from, just if this is an issue that, well, we have it in the narrative, but we don't necessarily have it in easily calculable data, that we just acknowledge that and make sure that's clear in that report, because I think the reader, as you're looking through these stats, there is a tendency to think, okay, what happened next? In that there is some limitations to what the RIPA data can provide. But also hearing this discussion makes it seem to me even more important for us to study the disparities, because that's what we're really looking at, is the disparities of youth who are being handcuffed for whatever the reason, and if a lot of the reasons are, ultimately later described by some as benign, I think the disparities are still really significant given some of the research that we are providing earlier in this chapter. But again, I think that if, to the extent that we could build a little bit more into the report about, are there some limitations about what happens next or what some of the reasons may be for these actions, I think could help round out the chapter a bit. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Board Member DeYoung.
Yes, thank you. Interesting discussion. Just kind of as a new board member, my initial reaction is I'm always in favor of more data rather than less. And I think the discussion, as suggested with board member Sierra, as it goes to the disparities of any kind of results after post handcuffs, could actually be illuminating in terms of some opposite conclusions. Obviously, the context in which law enforcement ultimately decides to, resolve an issue is important for kind of the understanding from the officer's perspective. But let's say, for example, there's substantial disparities in which, you would imagine that handcuffs that result in arrests, there's an investigatory detention. Obviously, there's probable cause that leads to arrest. That's one circumstance. But imagine the other circumstance where there's substantial, let's say, racial disparities in investigatory detentions, where we see certain groups getting arrested in situations where they're not. Handcuffed in situations where they're not arrested. I think that actually could illuminate issues as well as far as disparities that we're trying to address. So I'm in favor of more data rather than less.
Thank you, Board Member Diallo. Board Member Kazi.
Thank you. I'm also at a bit of a disadvantage, this being my first time being a part of this particular conversation. But I do note that there is a section 5 on page 39 that is dedicated to results of stops and does have a subsection A, which talks about whether action was taken or not taken. And to me, that seems to kind of get to the heart of part of this conversation of what was the result after that stop. Was no action taken, was a field interview card issued. I understand that there could be other outcomes that we could look to disaggregate. And I think understanding what particular outcomes the board would like to see added, because to me, this is already very helpful and telling. And then my second comment is just in terms of talking about use of force. But beyond use of force, just talking about stops and talking about reasonable suspicion. I mean, that this report is not making any analysis or determination on whether use of force was an unlawful or lawful use of force, whether a stop was lawful or unlawful. And all of that is very case specific. And that is often fleshed out either through civil proceedings, through the civilian complaints, or it's fleshed out as well through, criminal proceedings in terms of suppression of evidence and other things. So I think that the data has a different purpose here. The data is telling us, as has been said, the disparities, the propensities, but whether or not a specific use of force was justified, unjustified, lawful, or unlawful, I feel that the place for that is probably somewhere else and not in this report.
Thank you, Board Member Kazi. I think Board Member Randolph was next.
Yes, Board Member Kazi and Mr. Soy, thank you so much for saying I agree with more data. But this once again goes with what I've shared with various assembly members, some of them watching this call right now, is that this board, I encourage all my fellow board members to go out and watch a RIPA entry. You don't have to go on a ride along. You don't have to do anything with law enforcement. And there are some board members, I believe, on this call that are open-minded, that are open to do this, and watch a RIPA entry happen. Okay, that data, how it's collected, how that officer did that stop, and how they put that data in. So Jennifer, you're awesome. I'm glad you said there's a comment section. You're absolutely right. But a peace officer that's going out and having calls, 30 to 40 calls a day, probably over 150 stops or contacts with people. Some of them have to be RIPA entries. They're going to do their RIPA entries. They have to. I'm looking at a RIPA entry right now for my agency. I don't know how many entities that you guys deal with DOJ as far as portal goes. I'm looking at the disposition. I see the perceived sexual orientation. I know that's what the board wanted. I see the type of stop. I know that's what the board wanted. But there's nothing in here that says disposition. You're right on the comments, okay? But that's not a required field. That's not mandatory. And an officer that's going out, going call to call to call where people need help to maintain peace and order, they're going to do that RIPA entry as soon as possible, send it, and they're going to go to the next call. So maybe we need to start talking about what the disposition is at the end. That's what I've been talking about since I became a member of the board, and that's what Sheriff said, and I'm glad other board members now are saying that as well. I don't want more information, but I do want more information that will back up the fact that we're not arresting 2,000 children in the state of California. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Randolph, Board Member Guerrero.
Yes, I just wanted clarification from the Department of Justice staff. My understanding is that we do capture arrest as a data point for outcome, and my memory is a little fuzzy at times, but I do recall in prior reports dealing with the general population that we have provided that arrest information. And in fact, I might have even remembered seeing it in the stop data section of the report for this year. But I think that adding that in would be helpful here. And so even at a minimum, even if we're not able to do the deeper analysis, people can at least take a look at the arrest data as part of this section of outcomes. And then they will have a very loose understanding of how many people are handcuffed, how many people are arrested, and of course, researchers are welcome to do deep dives into the data, outside of our own analysis, right? We provide all this to the public to be able to do that, but having that added into this section, I do think would be helpful.
You're correct, Co-Chair Guerrero. The RIPA regulations do require officers to report the result of a stop and define the possible entries that officers may report as the result of a stop. There are approximately 13 options. Some of those include arrest, cite and release, citation, psychiatric hold, referral to school authorities, and others. And those are required to be reported for each stop.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, and thank you to all the board members for your comments and questions. We do write these down. We are going to be taking a look at all of this and really appreciate your consideration of this portion of the report. I don't see any other hands raised, so I'm going to go to the next area of the report to discuss. The third area of the report has to do with youth-specific policies of law enforcement agencies, and we looked at Wave 1 and Wave 2 agencies, the top 15 law enforcement agencies, and conducted an analysis of the policies that they may or may not have with regards to youth and police interactions with youth. So this is found in section 2. It's pages 45 to 59 of the draft report. Between the last time the policy subcommittee meeting policy subcommittee met, and now we conducted a survey of those agencies and asked questions about their youth-specific policies and consolidated those in this portion of the report. We'll put it in a chart, which also follows with a discussion afterwards. And as you can see from the chart on pages 46 and 47, there are what we were able to find is that there aren't that many youth-specific policies that these agencies have. We reviewed agency policies regarding use of force in the field, regarding use of force while in police custody, and we also looked at specific types of uses of force while in police custody, such as tasers or the use of hobble restraints. So these are just the policies regarding those particular issues, and that's found on pages 47 to 51. We also looked at agency policies, law enforcement agency policies regarding questioning of youth and the special considerations facing youth of color during police questioning. And that's on pages 53 to 57. And the policies with regards to with regards to police interaction with youth and specific to youth and the data from this year inform this year's potential recommendations. So looking at all the policies and then combining that with the data that we've collected and the research, that's the areas that we looked at in terms of forming our potential recommendation. Before I move on to that section, I see that board member co-chair Guerrero's hand is up. Please.
Yes, this section was illuminating as well. I think that even though there are a limited number of agency policies and state law is scarce on these issues, what we may have available to us are best practice standards, and I think including those here would be helpful. And so I'm talking about a Police Executive Research Forum as an example, or the Vera Institute as an example. I haven't taken a look at those with regard to these issues, but I think a search of those would be helpful. The other thing that would be good to note here, as we have done in reports past, is to note the international treaty obligation that we have around use of force, because that will inform what the parameters of use of force should be. And I'm happy to send that to you, but just as a reminder to the general public that Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution renders international treaties that we've signed and ratified the law of the land at every level of government. And we have, in fact, signed and ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the Human Rights Committee that reviews the United States implementation of that met last year, made recommendations for how government at every level in the United States can better align with those treaty obligations regarding use of force. So I think that could be very helpful here and fill in some of the gaps that you're pointing to. So those two suggestions, policing expert institutions like the Police Executive Research Forum as a reference point, and also international treaty standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Are there questions, comments about this section, section 2, regarding specific policies with regards to police interaction with youth? Yes, Board Member Randall.
Hey, Alex, thank you so much. Good information in here. So this is specific towards the school police departments that are in our state. You guys pulled their policies?
This survey was to those 15 agencies with regards to any youth policies that they have, not specific to schools, youth policies.
But were they school police? They were school police departments, though. They're sanctioned and governed by a board of directors, like from a school board, correct?
No, this is, for example, I assume that if LAPD has a SRO or a school branch to it, then they would have forwarded those policies, but this was to the law enforcement agencies generally.
So you guys, it was only 15 that you guys.
We have conducted a survey of the other wave 3 and wave 4 agencies, but this portion of the report only has the wave 1 and wave 2, the top 15 agencies.
Oh, so this is just the start rolling out of RIPA, like the 2000 and below, or okay. Thank you, Andre. I see you're nodding. So okay,
Correct.
All right. I was just concerned, and just for the record and for the board, as we're kind of learning here. So, school police departments, even though we might look at their policies or whatnot, I'm just throwing it out there. They also have specific policies within the district. And if you have, if I'm speaking out of turn, Sheriff, let me know, out of the 550 or 530 law enforcement agencies in the state, all of those that might have deputy sheriffs or peace officers that contract as school resource officers of the district, 9 times out of 10, they have an MOU in place where they actually talk about use of force, contacts, and certain things. So aside from the policies and procedures which are mandated by that school resource officer, okay, which probably has a supervisor that had to go to special training based on school policing, there's also some things, some school districts have got contracts in place as to who's going to handle certain issues, what things of, this is where the district will lean on law enforcement on, this is where the district will not lean on law enforcement on. So if I'm out of tune, Sheriff, let me know. But I just want to make sure the board knew that there's a lot of different parameters. When a cop steps foot on a school with a contract, there's like another whole layer of oversight and overview and quite a bit more supervision, and rightfully so, based on what we're discussing today.
Thank you, Board Member Randolph. Board Member Bianca.
Yes, thank you. And from a policy maker, I just want to clarify or ask what exactly it was that you were looking for. And when you say policy against youth, we were talking, when it transitioned into that, it went from talking about use of force into policies for youth, and what are your policies for youth? And so I have to tell you, I mean, I hope this board would never, we had this a year ago where we were all against it, and for very good reasons. And the report and the recommendations were against what we said, but it is impossible for me to have a policy for youth, because in our interaction, we can't, or I mean, maybe there would be a certain time where we knew going in, but it is impossible to decide who is a minor and who is not. And just to show this, if any of you have high school age children or grandchildren, if you've been to a high school football game, those kids are over 6 foot, they're over 200, 250, 300, and we're talking about 15, 16, and 17-year-old youth, and what's been referred to here as children. And if we have a policy that says we do not, for instance, handcuff youth, or we do not detain youth, you have to see that we live in a litigious society. That's all we are going to do, is open ourselves up to multi-million-dollar lawsuits for violating our own policies, because it's impossible to determine that without the initial response saying, excuse me, who's a juvenile? And then separating from juveniles and then only dealing with adults or something like that. So having a broad, open policy that only deals with youth is, I don't see how it's going to happen. We have a use of force policy that is, I mean, it's age non-specific. It's from whoever we interact with. And we certainly, in light of dealing with school boards and dealing with judgments against schools, we have had to adjust our MOUs to say that if at all possible, we will, we may have a policy that says we shall try to refrain or try to limit, but we can't have we can't have those age-specific policies when it's impossible to determine. If it was a situation where only a school, where we know that every single child in that school, but that's a school policy. You're not asking those, you're asking the law enforcement response, and that's two different entities that I can tell you why you didn't get a response for youth-specific uses of force policies, because we can't have them.
Thank you, Board Member Bianco, and just to give some clarity as to the process, on page 46, we have articulated some of the questions that we had asked in the survey. The full survey will appear in the appendix, and I understand that's not preferable for everybody. But the questions, I think there were 20 questions that were asked about particular policies with regards to youth. For example, how does your agency define youth? Do you have a written policy pertaining to the questioning of youth? Do you have policies regarding use of force? Board Member Sierra.
Yes, thank you. So I also have a couple questions about the chart. So it looks like, as I'm reading this, most of these agencies then do have a policy that is directed regarding use of force in youth, correct? I mean, that's what we have the check mark on almost all of those. It's the other ones that there aren't policies. And my question on the other four categories, for example, policies prohibiting field interview cards for youth, does that category capture whether or not an agency has a policy that may limit the field interview cards for youth, but doesn't necessarily completely prohibit them? Or are we only looking at complete prohibitions? And is that information we would have collected or that you have? Because it seemed like, we were looking at a very specific policy versus like, well, do you give guidance to your officers at all on this issue with respect to youth?
So thank you for that. And as to the first question, we put it in a footnote with regards to the use of force against youth. The agencies that all of the agencies responded, the agencies' responses showed that I believe all of them had use of force policies regarding youth in some form or measure after the youth has been placed in custody, but not before the youth has been placed in custody. So that's the difference between in the chart. With regards to policies prohibiting field interview cards, we could certainly change that. We had asked, I believe the question was, do you have a policy regarding field interview cards and youth? So if I will definitely double check on that. I believe that was the form of the question. So that would encompass a policy that limited field interview cards, but didn't outright prohibit field interview cards from being generated for youth.
Great. I think that could be helpful if we have that information to expand those headings, so it's clear what is being captured. Thank you.
Board Member Kazi.
So I have a question about, so I understand we're looking at the section that's about law enforcement policies, correct? And there's a subsection, I think it's subsection 2. I wish I had a table of contents. I'm kind of missing. It's on page 52. Subsection 2, law enforcement agencies should adopt policies restricting the use of force on youth except when absolutely necessary. And I do understand later on in the report that we do have policy recommendations. This subsection to me does read like a policy recommendation. So my first question is that the appropriate heading for this section of the report? And my second comment is, if it is the appropriate place, and I do have an issue with the wording. I was also very disturbed to kind of see in one place the data on the use of force, the handcuffing on youth. Our charts show that there are youth from the ages 1 to 7 who are being handcuffed in the state of California. And I think that we should take a bolder stance as a body to say that there are situations where we would recommend the prescription of that's with a PRO, of the use of force on youth. And I understand that later on we do talk about recommendations of establishing another body to look at this, but I would want to see this heading changed to law enforcement agency should adopt policies restricting or proscribing the use of force on youth, and then take out the except when absolutely necessary.
Thank you, Board Member Kazi. And just as this is probably the smallest part of your comment, but if you're looking at the report on Adobe Acrobat, if you look at the bookmarks, those are all bookmarked by heading. So, but I don't want to gloss over the other comments that you made. I just wanted to make it maybe a little bit easier for you and the general public to see the report. But I did hear your other comments regarding whether or not this is the appropriate heading, whether or not this portion of the report should be in a different section, and we can certainly look into that. Co-Chair Dilbar.
Yeah, I have just a couple minor edits, but also had the question about the heading because it did initially when I read it, it did read as though it's a recommendation. So agree with changing the language there. In terms of the two minor edits, one is footnote 123, where the report mentions a discussion about pre-arrest youth diversion. It says it's covered in section Roman numeral 2A. I believe that's supposed to be 3A, and maybe that's just left over from a previous version. And then the second edit, and this is about readability on this. So on page 49, in the use of force in the field versus after youth have been placed in custody section, halfway through the paragraph, there's a sentence, according to the policy, youth who are suspected of felony offenses should not, and then it goes into the quote. That sentence reads awkwardly to me. I'm wondering if the not is supposed to be there to describe LAPD's policy. And so it should read that those youth suspected of felony offenses should normally be handcuffed. However, there may be times where it's inappropriate. Is that what it's supposed to say?
I believe you're correct, and I apologize
Okay.
if that was incorrect.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other thoughts, comments? Hearing and seeing none, I'll move on to the fourth area of the report, and that's potential board recommendations in this area. That's found on in section 3, pages 59 to 68. In this area, we discussed the research surrounding pre-arrest diversion or deflection that is found on pages 59 to 64, and that's addressing what happens at the initial police stop, whether the youth should be deflected or sent to diversion or offered diversion before an arrest even occurs. So there are multiple studies which we reference in this portion of the report that show that any contact with the system, the quote unquote system, including an arrest or even an initial court date, make it more likely that a child will experience negative outcomes later in life, including making it less likely they will finish school and more likely they will become further ensnared in the system. And those studies appear on page 61. And in fact, this year, the California legislature reaffirmed its support for, quote, utilizing research and evidence-based, trauma-informed, community-based programs that include alternatives to arrest, incarceration, and formal involvement with the juvenile justice system, and which aim to deflect or divert youth from justice system engagement at the earliest possible point. So those recommendations from the state legislature, they appear on page 61. In this area, we also looked at prior recommendations from this board regarding police interactions with youth, and those appear on pages 64 to 65. We look at recommendations this board had created specific to youth, and those recommendations are consistent with and supported by the research discussed in this section, and they recognize and are sensitive to the unique considerations present in any law enforcement interaction with youth. We also looked at other recommendations that this board has made, which, while they're not specific to youth, are also consistent with and supported by the research. Again, that's on pages 64 and 65. And finally, we talked about and presented potential recommendations. These potential recommendations are derived from the discussions of this subcommittee and the full board during this year. The potential recommendations are also informed by the research detailed in this chapter, and they're informed by the data. And those potential recommendations appear on pages 66 and 60 to 68. There are 4 potential recommendations. Just a reminder, as always, these are potential recommendations for the board's consideration that are based on its discussions, on the research, on the data. The subcommittee members may add any other recommendations they think should be given consideration by the full board. So, as Dr. Dobart had mentioned, this has 2 parts. The first is the board's discussion and consideration of the 4 potential recommendations, along with any other potential recommendations the board members would like to propose. The second part is a vote on the potential recommendations the subcommittee would like to forward to the full board for consideration. So looking at the 4 potential recommendations included in the draft, number 1, the legislature should create and fund a community panel responsible for developing policies and training for officers and youth interaction, with a focus on use of force, de-escalation, and child development. And that recommendation appears on pages 66 to 67. Recommendation number 2, the legislature should require and fund mandatory deflection or pre-arrest diversion for all youth charged with any of the low-level offenses, a status offense, a misdemeanor, or a low-level or non-violent felony. That's page 67. Recommendation number 3, the legislature, agencies, and municipalities should explore limiting officer discretion in stops to reduce racial disparities. And that's on page 67. And then finally, recommendation number 4, recommendation that law enforcement agencies reevaluate proactive policing strategies and should collaborate with community-based organizations. So those are the 4 recommendations, potential recommendations. I will now turn it back to Dr. Dobart so that the subcommittee can discuss these potential recommendations and any other recommendations the subcommittee members want to add. I just want to thank you for your time. And if there are any other questions that we at the DOJ can answer, please let us know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson and DOJ for this great work. Co-Chair Guerrero, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. Before we get into the recommendations, I just wanted to make a suggestion regarding the text that precedes it in the prior board recommendations. I would request that we pull in more of the prior recommendation around use of force, because I think it's important here to add in what we have said before around limiting use of force to that which is necessary and proportional, consistent with our international treaty obligations and best practices. So we already made that recommendation. I would just recommend we fill out, this is like a super summary recommendation of our statement of our previous recommendation. I would suggest that we fill that out a little bit more so that people remember what we said before. That's it. I'm ready to get into the recommendations. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Before we do, we are scheduled to have a break and want to ask board members, would you like to take this 15-minute break or plow ahead? What is your preference? Break? Okay,
Break,
I'm seeing
please.
head nod. Yes. Okay, so we will break for 15 minutes and reconvene at 10:30. Is that right, DOJ?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, we'll see you all at 10:30. Thank you. Let's reconvene. Other board members, if you're unable to come on camera, just let us know you're here.
Co-Chair Dobard, you do have quorum if you would like to get started.
Okay, we will do that. All right, so again, I want to thank DOJ for the updated draft and thank my fellow board members for the discussion we've had thus far. I'll now open it up for discussion on any part of the draft, including the recommendations, but we will not be voting on the recommendations until we've had robust discussion on them, or at least provided some space for such discussion, and have also heard from the public. So please hold any motions until then. All right, and let's start with anything else board members wish to share or raise about the draft separate from the recommendations. Is there anything else that anyone would like to raise at this point? Okay. So let's go to the recommendations then. Thoughts, questions on the first recommendation? That the legislature should create and fund a community panel responsible for developing standards, policies, and training for officers as it relates to youth, with a focus on use of force, de-escalation, and child development. Yes, Board Member Kazi, and then Board Member Guerrero.
Yeah, I guess my first question is for the staff or anyone else on the board. The first part is just if there's precedent for creating such community panels, have they been successful, or have they taken too long to get? Like, what are the pros and cons of creating a panel? I'm sorry if that's been discussed already and I missed it. So if you can point me to a resource, I'd be happy to review that. And then my second comment is just about recommendation 1, subsection A, again, about it says use of the least restrictive means of force when interacting with youth in the field, and should limit the use of restraints, handcuffs, etc. Where in subsection C's, it says when to limit or prescribe an officer's actions. So I would like to see subsection A mimic the language of subsection C, and I believe it should say and should limit or prescribe the use of restraints, handcuffs, etc. Largely due to the comment that I shared earlier.
Okay, and I believe DOJ is going to try to capture proposed edits as they are mentioned.
Yeah, is it okay if I step in, John?
Yes. Well, let me ask DOJ, any questions about what was proposed? Did you capture that?
I just want to make sure that I have put the potential edit in the correct spot, but I think board member, sorry, co-chair Guerrero, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Thanks. Yeah. So, I think that it's unclear to me, like, mechanically what a community panel would be, whether this is and how long it would last. You know, I've seen, like, at the federal level where I do most of my work, I've seen Congress, for example, pull together an advisory committee on a limited time advisory committee on a specific issue. And it wasn't necessarily funded. It was just sort of a blue ribbon set of experts to look at a particular issue. So I would feel more comfortable making a recommendation that said something like the legislature should convene a panel of experts that include or convene a panel of experts to recommend standards, policies, and training for officers as it relates to youth, with a focus on use of force, de-escalation, and child development. And then members of the panel should include, at a minimum, affected community members, experts in the development of use of force policies and trainings, human rights experts, and then I would leave out the rest. And then I would actually leave out the rest of the paragraph, and I would actually drop the subpoints and leave it to a panel to determine the specifics of what they would cover. I think the subpoints are problematic for a few reasons. They're very prescriptive of a body that we don't know whether or not will be convened. And the last one in particular is tricky. The D, which I don't see on the page on the screen, but D, you know, sounds like a recommendation unto itself, and starts to intertwine with posts. So I think that just gets very messy. We could imagine that this panel of experts convened by the legislature, funded or unfunded, would make recommendations that would be available to all the stakeholders, to law enforcement, to policymakers, to post, etc. Right? And so we're limiting them in making recommendations on these specific things. And yes, so that would be my recommendation, to rein it in a bit, make it more digestible and actionable for the legislature.
Thank you, Co-Chair Guerrero. Board Member Sierra.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I very much like this idea that we are recommending that there should be a legislative kind of analysis of this and for recommendations, because I think it really does follow our report, which will provide this panel, whatever panel legislature convenes, with so much like rich information. But to me, it really does follow. Looking back at our report on page 53, we talk there right above subsection B about what researchers and advocates have recommended. And, you know, to some extent, I mean, these are really very complex issues, and I think there's a lot of nuance in these issues. And I'm really happy, and I really support the fact that we are providing a recommendation that the legislature, so that it can actually very effectively adopt legislation to do a further study beyond what we have done here. And I think that we've given them a lot of information to really take it to the next level. So I very much think having it general so the legislature can figure out what will best be effective here is a good approach. I'm wondering if the members, we should also include at a minimum, there should be child development experts in addition to experts in the development of the use of force and trainings, that might be helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this first recommendation or reactions to what has been shared so far?
Just to switch it so that you can see what it would now look like without all of the edits. The legislature should convene a panel of experts to recommend standards, policies, and training for officers as it relates to youth with a focus on use of force, de-escalation, and child development. Members of the panel should include, at a minimum, affected community members, experts in the development of use of force policies and trainings, child development experts, and human rights experts.
Yes, Board Member Randall.
Thank you, John. I'm just curious, are we also going to add law enforcement into this list since they're the most affected? I mean, everyone's affected because we're all community partners, right? We all have stakes in this. I'm just curious, are we going to put law enforcement here at all?
Yeah, I actually had that in my head and it didn't come out of my mouth, but I think absolutely law enforcement experts or law enforcement experts would be great.
Board Member Sierra.
Oh, actually, never mind. I just, I had misread this because I was thinking we want to make sure they're going to be recommending something, but we have it in our first phrase here. So I will unraise my hand.
Okay. All right, one last call. Anything else on this first recommendation?
Sorry, this is Board Member Kajabi. I want to apologize. I'm having an internet issue, so I rejoined by phone, but I'm going to have to leave because of Merle in a moment. I just wanted to say that I appreciate the changes that were made in the recommendations so far. But I think overall, I'm really pleased to see these recommendations. They align with what we gleaned from the summit, I'll call it the summit meeting we had. It was great to hear from community organizers and just wide range of perspectives in California. And so I'm not going to be able to join for the rest of the meeting, but I appreciate the overall direction of the report and the suggestions that were made so far in modifying the recommendations. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks for joining, Board Member Kajabi, and we'll see you at a future meeting.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Okay, I'm going to move us on now to the second recommendation. The legislature should require and fund mandatory deflection and pre-arrest diversion for all youth charged with a status offense, misdemeanor, or low-level nonviolent felony. In the alternative, these agencies should create policies where there is a rebuttable presumption of pre-arrest diversion for these offenses. I'll just say I have one suggestion that where it says in the alternative, these agencies, I would just clarify that we're talking about law enforcement agencies here. So the way this is reading is legislature should do this. In the event that the legislature doesn't do this, law enforcement agencies should do that. Board Member Randall.
Thank you, John. And this kind of goes along with what we've talked about in the past. And I know, John, you and I have, I mean, you and I have kind of seen eye to eye on this. I don't know if the board is ready to do this because it seems like it has not been well received. But to do this, I'm involved with agencies that do diversionary programs. You have to track that. You have to monitor that. You have to give some kind of recognition to the agency. Some agencies do it, some agencies don't. But if we're going to start throwing this out, then we need to also dive into what positive or PR things, forget about PR, what things are law enforcement agencies, what other proactive approaches are agencies doing? And I know for a fact, I can think of out of the 15 school police departments, just the school police departments in the state that are doing it, at least 9 of them have some kind of diversionary program where it's no citation. There's nothing in the courts. It's another angle that they go in. And what I've seen in past meetings, I'm hoping we're moving forward. This is a sign that one of the quotes I heard from a board member is, we're not here to highlight the positives of law enforcement. So this kind of goes into that realm. So that's just something I wanted to open up since we have new board members here. That's an angle. I love it, but we also need to start looking down the angle of what kind of documentation are agencies providing, or what are they doing? What efforts are they doing? I know they are doing quite a bit. That was all.
And just a clarifying question, Member Randolph, and is the proposal that's something that the board should be tracking moving forward?
Absolutely. We should have been doing it once we started on the youth, because I noticed last year that's all this board wanted to do. Was to really target on the youth contacts. And as a cop of 26 years, a school chief, and as a school resource officer for 5 years and a supervisor, you name the scenarios I've been through, all these scenarios we're talking about. I think it's important, and we should have been doing it when we were going to dive into it. And I presented it last year, and there was outright opposition from the majority of the board. So that's why it didn't move forward. I love that we're talking about it now because there is so much diversion going right now. But one thing I also am disappointed in is we keep talking about diversion programs, and law enforcement that's going out and arresting juveniles left and right. There's laws that are now in place, and juvenile delinquency is definitely there's a lot more difference now especially with the CYA and the JDB gone. There's a lot less law enforcement intervention or interaction with juveniles on the criminal justice side. But that's like another whole discussion, but that was all.
Okay. Well, let me ask DOJ how we may want to capture that recommendation. And I see your hand, Board Member Bianco. I'll get to you. But want to ask how we DOJ's suggestion on how to treat this recommendation from Board Member Randolph.
If Board Member Randolph can you state specifically what recommendation you would like to see included in the report, or how you would like this specific recommendation amended, please?
You're muted.
Absolutely, Jennifer, thank you. And John, thanks for letting me clarify this. So if we're going to go down the path of telling legislation this is the angle we'd like to go, I think it would be nice also, a part of this committee or legislation should be agencies, law enforcement agencies should provide diversionary programs, or maybe a committee that would document, or exploratory committee of diversionary programs. And also measures of effectiveness with those programs, because a lot of them do, in relation to juvenile delinquency. I mean, we're just kind of opening that door right now, right? And you're also kind of not forcing the hand, but we're opening the door, encouraging law enforcement to go down this path. Some are already doing it. That was all. exploratory committee, and there's no way to track it. I mean, I have it because I work in 3 different counties, so I'm familiar. I could outline all the agencies in Riverside County that have diversionary programs, or San Bernardino County, or San Luis Obispo County. What kind of program? I had to make an arrest on a juvenile for this, but I'm not going to issue a citation. This is the other angle we're going to go. We're going to take this class with your parent and members of the truancy community, the school district, and law enforcement, or not even involve law enforcement at all. That's what I was getting at.
Would
Did
it be
I outline
okay?
it?
Yeah, would it be okay with you if that was made into a separate recommendation from this, from the one to the legislature, because it would be directed to law enforcement agencies, and it would be related to the one to the legislature, but it would be specific to law enforcement agencies and how their diversion programs would be developed, including requiring some kind of measure for determining the effectiveness of the program. And are you suggesting that law enforcement agencies would actually track their effectiveness and conduct audits of their programs? Or would that be something that you would want another body to do?
I don't want to speak out of turn for chiefs and sheriffs throughout the state. I think Sheriff Bianco might speak also, and I don't want John and Ms. Guerrero, I don't want to throw too much in the woodworks on this, but I think it is a good avenue since we're going to start doing recommendations to the legislation on other avenues. I think this kind of falls parallel with it, but I mean, I don't want to, it's for discussion. I'm glad that we have this discussion. A year ago, this would not be happening.
But just to clarify, would you like that appended to this recommendation, or would you like it to be placed in its own recommendation and directed towards law enforcement agencies and municipalities?
I would like it in this recommendation.
Okay.
Number 2, it's all together. It's in sync. It shows here's a problem. Here's a solution. Let's look at the problem and the solution and work together on it. Sheriff, am I on the law enforcement side? Am I overexerting too much as a law enforcement lead? I have 5 people. You have hundreds, thousands. So.
Board Member Bianco, do you want to reply to that?
Yeah, I completely get where Rich is going, and from a law enforcement world, we truly are more interested in keeping them out of jail than putting them in jail. The problem that I can't get over, and there's absolutely no way I can support this, is because words mean things, and as I'm reading it, the only thing I'm getting out of this is fund and mandatory, and there's no one in here that's involved with our state government and our or our legislature, but there's absolutely no such thing as funding. Whenever something is imposed, it always gives the mandatory language of, whatever, and this creates a change and you'll get the funding. It doesn't happen. Law enforcement has never and will never get this funding. We only got it for AB 109. I mean, that's not even important, but we did get it one time, and we're all in amazement that it still even applies. But there will not be funding. But this is what why I can't support it. As it's written, a 17-year-old raping an intoxicated 15-year-old, or anyone supplying fentanyl that kills a student or child, whatever you want to call it, in California is a nonviolent felony. And I cannot agree to this mandatory diversion for someone that's committing a nonviolent felony because the legislature seriously is incompetent in keeping us safe by saying that rape of an intoxicated woman or man, or supplying fentanyl that kills somebody, is not a violent felony. So I apologize to all of you, but truly, hopefully hopefully you can believe me when I say this, just not from reputation, but I don't ever want kids going to jail. I don't even ever want to deal with juveniles, but the reality is that sometimes we have to. But for this right here, when we are we are recommending the legislator do something and say that they're going to do everything that we want them to do, and somebody's going to take this up, we are creating a horrible unintended consequence by the use of words. That's all. Thank you.
I'd love to
And-
jump in.
Yes.
Yes, so I rarely agree with Sheriff Bianco. I'll just say that now. But on this, I do agree. I think that, again, in order to provide an actionable recommendation to the legislature, knowing the deep interest in deflection and diversion programs, I would recommend a change to this language that would say the legislature should explore the expansion of deflection and pre-arrest diversion for youth, and I would take out the word all, for youth charged with a status offense, misdemeanor, or low-level nonviolent felony that includes a rebuttable presumption of eligibility, that can be overcome with of eligibility that can be overcome with evidence-based or something. I don't know what that word is, but that would be in parallel with some other things in the criminal justice system. And maybe then we could take out, it can be overcome with evidence-based arguments, maybe, and then take out the rest. And I think that still incorporates the exploration that Board Member Randolph was interested in, gets us out of a mandate, explore the expansion of, I would take out the word mandatory, because at the end of the day, this is going to be a funding issue. And sorry, explore the expansion of a word like universal might be better. Explore the expansion of universal deflection and diversion for youth charged with status of misdemeanors. That includes a rebuttable presumption of eligibility that can overcome with evidence-based arguments. Something like that. So it's an exploration of this. I think we're not ready for a directive. A rebuttable presumption, I think is a good start, and an exploration of the expansion of these programs.
Okay. Thank you. Board Member Sierra?
Yes, I like those changes a lot. I was thinking of incorporating something early on with respect to Chief Randolph's point, but I think, and I guess we'll hear from you, Chief, about, I agree, exploring the expansion would be, to me, that then to explore, you need to know what's already happening on the ground, what the LEAs are doing. So I would be comfortable with that. And in the end, I might change this argument to considerations, just wordsmithing that can be overcome with evidence-based considerations. But, yeah, I think that these are it's a good. I like these changes a lot.
Board Member Diallo?
Yes, thank you. Regarding first Board Member Randall's kind of observations and recommendations regarding existing programs, and I think actually the new language that was proposed captures this. It perfectly makes sense to include a review of existing programs when we're talking about incorporation of new diversion programs in terms of how those, first of all, how effective they are, how they can be expanded and built upon, in addition to proliferating them throughout the state. So I think it's appropriate to include, a recognition and a review, to see what's working and what's not before reinventing the wheel. Second, with respect to Sheriff Bianco's comments, we oftentimes get tripped up on definitions, and to the extent that we could, the definition is not capturing something that we would otherwise be in agreement on. The word nonviolent could refer to a specific penal code definition, for example, 667.5 of the penal code, in which very specific crimes are listed, really under 3 strikes sentencing. And I don't think that's the spirit of this in terms of, defining in such a narrow categories in terms of what would be eligible for diversion and what would not. I think nonviolent, at least and meant here, is meant to be descriptive of low-level type felonies that many people would agree may be appropriate for diversion, and where the board would review such offenses, and in terms of their work, this panel would review such, and what's appropriate and what's not. But to the extent that we could think of other language that would, kind of reflect what we want, and or be more specific as to, if it's not restrictive in terms of certain penal code sections or things like that. I don't know if that would address Sheriff Bianco's concerns, because I would hate to trip up over definitions that are more expansive than what we're intending.
Yes, and I am sure other members welcome any suggestions on revised language there. Board Member Bianco.
Yes, I'm sorry. I wanted to comment, but I wanted you to tell me okay in case someone else was getting in before me. I couldn't see anybody else's hand up. I agree 100%, and truly, in my interaction over the last 5 years with the legislature, it is far too important for us to not pay attention to words, because I completely agree with those comments in that the unintended consequences of using a word and the intent of the word and what we really meant. But in the end, no one knows what we really meant, because they weren't listening to this conversation. So it just goes off of the wording. And we are stuck with what their definition of nonviolent felonies are, which is completely wrong. And sure, it's debatable, but an intoxicated female is a violent rape, whether you want to call it that or not, or whether the legislature wants to or not. It should be not debatable. But if we word something and they just go off of that wording, we are creating that unintended consequence down the line. As is in this, I agree with the changes and the rewording, with the exception of the pre-arrest part, where it could just say deflection or diversion instead of the pre-arrest. Because imagine the statement we are giving to every other student in that school if someone is raped and we are in a pre-arrest mandatory diversion, and so there is absolutely zero consequence for a male that rapes a woman or a male that rapes a man, and the rest of the entire student population knows it because there's no consequence. There's a diversion program, there's counseling, and there is nothing for those victims, or there is nothing to empower them to even want to report something, put themselves out in the future. So by saying a pre-arrest, so we're just going to make sure that juveniles are never arrested. there's something horribly wrong with that, because there are, unfortunately, whether we want to all agree or not, there are times that it has to happen. But if we name it pre-arrest and they adopt it, the legislature says, oh, look at this great language they used, and they adopt it, then now we have created a situation that we wish we wouldn't have, but that may not have been our intent. Thank you.
Thank you. Co-Chair Guerrero. You're muted.
And I have some wordsmithing suggestions that I think can help us get to consensus. So first, just to pick up on Board Member Diallo's recommendation to insert the words after the legislature should include the words review the efficacy of existing programs, existing deflection and diversion programs, and explore the expansion of expansion to universal instead of deflection or diversion, take out pre-arrest, because then that encompasses the breadth of the different types of diversion programs for youth charged with a status offense, misdemeanor, or other low-level offense, as you know, as later determined. I think unless we have another word, I think we need to put in language that would have people thinking about it, exploring it. So open to if there are other words that would indicate that they're determined. Yeah, this probably needs to be cleaned up a little bit more, but those are my initial thoughts.
You.
Maybe broken up into two sentences.
Yeah, a couple things. First, when I'm reading this, I'm not reading that a youth who is being suspected of being raped will be put in diversion or deflection. I read this as that qualifying as a felony, as actually a violent felony, that a youth would not qualify for. This might be a better question or better addressed by one of the law enforcement board members or Board Member Diallo, but I don't know if you can have pre-arrest diversion for someone who has been charged. It seems there's like the charges come after an arrest. So I feel, is there a better word than charged? Suspected of, or if there's a probable cause determination for, or something other than charged. And yeah, I also need a minute. I think we've gone a lot of places in this, and I wonder if at some point we should move on so we can kind of review this and come to better language on it. But I also have a point of process for the board chair. Is there a point where we hear from staff of, you know, maybe they're obviously the words that they put in this report were very carefully chosen, and I'm wondering if, you know, there is something that we're missing, not considering when the staff, you know, put this wording in. Now we're wordsmithing it. So, point of process before public comment. Is there a point where we can hear from staff too?
Yes. The short answer is yes, and I believe staff can chime in as we're discussing these.
I could certainly speak to some of these comments that maybe help to clarify some of the things and suggested edits that we're talking about with regards to reviewing the efficacy of existing deflection and diversion programs and exploring the expansion to universal deflection or pre-arrest diversion as it reads now. The emphasis on mandatory deflection or pre-arrest diversion was to the issue of officer discretion when it comes to diversion programs or determinations to assign people to deflection or pre-arrest diversion. The research that we have in the report demonstrates that when officers have the option of sending people to diversion or sending people to deflection, racial disparities do exist when looking at those individuals who are sent to those programs or sent to traditional, arrested or sent to the traditional criminal legal system or juvenile justice system. The statements about deflection for status offenses, misdemeanors, or other low-level offenses relates to the research and the work that programs like Centinela Youth Services in Los Angeles and Los Angeles's diversion programs, which are also referenced in the report, show that for offenses not of the type that I believe we are talking about as the very serious offenses, but offenses like status offenses or misdemeanors or non-violent offenses, that individuals who are referred to those programs are successful, and that there's also research that shows that the victims of those crimes benefit from from participating in those programs. So that is the with regards to the statements about mandatory deflection, and I think universal deflection may capture that, but it was really only about the removal of discretion as a means to ensure that racial and identity disparities do not show up in participation in those deflection programs.
Any follow-up questions, Board Member Kazi, on that?
No, thank you for clarifying that. And I can see how the word mandatory, I do feel like, you know, the particular mandate of this board is to address those biases. And I am leaning towards putting that mandatory back in to account for those biases. And, you know, I'd like to think a little bit more and hear from the public, you know, whether universal or mandatory, if it makes a substantial difference. Yes, so thank you for that.
Co-Chair Guerrero, and I want to acknowledge, I did hear your comment about potentially breaking it up into 2 sentences. I don't know if you want to also go back to that in addition to
Yeah,
what
so
you
I
raised your
think,
hand for.
yeah, thanks. So, you know, we have the language of rebuttable presumption, which I think is key, right? And so, mandatory sort of undercuts, the word mandatory undercuts the last part of this right now, the rebuttable presumption that's overcomable with evidence-based considerations, right? So that's why I don't like mandatory. Plus, I know the legislature hates the word mandatory and law enforcement hates it even more. So I'm just trying to give us our best shot at getting an actionable recommendation to the legislature. So my recommendation to get us to the finish line possibly is to take out as later determined, because I think low-level offense is descriptive, and you know, ultimately, like, it'll be the legislature that decides what the universe is of offenses, and then take out the words "that includes" and replace those with the word "with." And then I think we get a readable sentence.
Okay. I heard Board Member Kazi's request to hear from the public and potentially going back to this, but I do need to move us on because we are coming up on time. So I'm going to move us on to the third recommendation. which is the legislature, agencies, and municipalities should explore how limiting officer discretion and stops could reduce racial disparities and make specific findings from their study. Want to open it up. Any recommendations, edits, or questions for DOJ? No? Great. Okay. So we will move up. Oh, no, let's go back. Co-chair Guerrero.
Okay, sorry. I always have a thought. Okay. I think the first sentence is solid. I think after that, it doesn't sound like a recommendation. It sounds like report body text language. So I would strike the yeah, all that I would strike. And could you reduce and make specific recommendations for the study? And then I would just add to that, should make specific findings from their study to act on. I would add after the word study. Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else on this third one from anyone?
Just what this is, Sheriff Bianco, and I couldn't find the button to raise my hand. And I did, whether she likes it or not, I just want to point out to Andrea that we probably agree on more things than she thinks.
All right. Okay, let's move on to the fourth recommendation. Main part is the board recommends that law enforcement agencies reevaluate proactive policing practices and should collaborate with community-based organizations and other social services agencies to form partnerships so that law enforcement officers are not the primary responders to behavioral emergency incidents involving youth. It's to this recommendation. Questions about this recommendation? Yes, Co-Chair Guerrero.
Yes, so this thing seems like two different things, and I don't know if that was the intention. We recently engaged with the San Diego Police Department around the issue of proactive policing, and in fact, we talked about this very recommendation about collaborating with community-based organizations, but it wasn't so specific to behavioral emergencies. So I don't know if we could broaden this language and to reevaluate proactive policing practices that have a disparate impact and should collaborate with community-based organizations to find alternatives to increase public safety, which is exactly what we talked to SDPD about. And this other part of the last part, I don't know if that could be viewed as encompassed in what's already been written, just end the sentence there, or if that's another thought about, I mean that stuff is important. So I would recommend making it a separate recommendation because it's specifically dealing with potentially mental health services, or figuring out a way to wrap it in, but it seems too narrow for what I think the recommendation starts out doing.
Co-Chair Andrea, could you clarify alternatives to what? To find alternatives? Alternatives to proactive policing?
Yeah, so, we engaged with San Diego Police Department about they're doing what they call proactive policing in our neighborhood, and as a result, they keep stopping our canvassers. And then, filling out field interview cards, letting them go, but basically just kind of trying to map who's in the community. And it has a disparate impact, and it's affecting particularly our men of color. And so we engaged with the police department about, what alternatives there might be if there's a concern about rising crime and violence in the community. We haven't come to solutions about that because we're still in that engagement. But so I don't know that we want to define it, but I think we both recognized that the proactive policing was being received by the community as very harmful. And so we're engaged in a dialogue to address it. So that language gives us a space to do that. Welcome any other thoughts around this. I just didn't want it to be so narrowly constructed that it's tied to behavioral emergencies, because in this case, the proactive policing is really a de facto stop and frisk that we're trying to eliminate. That's not tied to behavioral health.
And just, and did that answer your question, Board Member Kazi?
Yeah, it does. And I agree. I don't think we need to necessarily add language, because if you had an alternate to something else, then I think we added it. But I think the way it reads as alternatives to proactive policing. So thank you.
All right. And then just a clarifying question for Co-Chair Guerrero. In the interest of clarifying these edits, I think your suggestion is to, at least on recommendation 4, end it after public safety. So increase public safety, period. Is that right? And then
yes,
for that 5th recommendation, do you want community-based organizations included there, or were you not intending to include community-based organizations in that particular recommendation?
Yeah, sure. They're a stakeholder. They're an important player.
Okay. All right, Board Member Bianco. You're muted. You're still muted.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This may be a clarifying question for Andrea, and it's definitely in no way a rebuttal or not having the same opinion. I just want to make sure of something, because for a law enforcement agency that represents so many people, I mean, we are extremely large with many different cities and communities who are truly, the communities are asking us for these proactive policies that keep law enforcement in their cities and in their neighborhoods. And I 100% agree or understand and get that it's making it difficult for organizers or people walking through neighborhoods that are either gathering signatures or doing whatever it is they're doing. But that's the whole point. And if they're not, just because they're being stopped and asked why they're there, that's what the communities are asking us. So yes, this organization is part of a community, but not the neighborhood that lives there. And so there's a huge discrepancy, or maybe just like something that's not meshing together when we talk about communities that are that are demanding more law enforcement in their communities for a proactive service rather than just being reactive. And then the fact that we know that proactivity and a long time ago, the broken windows theory, it truly does work. And so I completely understand that. I agree with the changes that she made. But then moving into recommendation number 5, I just want to point out that I am completely unaware of any law enforcement organization that doesn't already do that. So to get them to recommend something that we're all already doing, I don't know if it's actually needed.
Right. Board Member Sierra.
Yes, just following up on that, I also would recommend to delete number 5, because that was, I think an issue that our board worked we targeted that issue a couple of reports ago, and I think there has been so much development in that area within law enforcement, and we've already had this type of recommendation, and it seems like less of a focus of our report this year. So I think I very much agree with not having the focus of number 4, but I really don't think we need number 5. And I think then, yeah, we would need to talk about, kind of exploring what is already existing. So I think we've already done a lot of work in that area. So that'd be my recommendation, would be to delete that.
Chair Guerrero. You're muted.
I concur, and in fact, we could bring forward in the part above with regard to past recommendations, we could bring forward the recommendations already made. Excuse me, just so they're sitting there in the report. And Sheriff Bianco, I hear you on the 4th point. And I think, the reevaluation is an opportunity for the conversation about what the impact is of policing practices. And, it was a hard conversation that we had, but I think we were all the better for it with the police department. For the record, we are in the community that is where this is happening. We are of that same community. And so, we're concerned about it, and we have a new police chief, so we have a chance to turn the page and have the deep, hard conversations and broaden those conversations beyond our immediate circles to the broader community, and really get at this issue. And this recommendation really opens up the space for that and reaffirms that as a strategy.
Right. In the interest of time, I do want to move us on to public comment, but I will ask, is there any final burning edit suggestion for this 4th recommendation? Okay. All right. So at this time, the public is welcome to address the subcommittee for up to 2 minutes. Under the Bagley-Keene Act, neither board members nor DOJ staff are required to respond to public comment, but can choose to provide a brief response. You can submit public comments by raising your hand in the Teams app, unmuting yourself if you're on the telephone, or by submitting a public comment after the meeting by emailing ab953@doj.ca.gov. Again, that is ab953@doj.ca.gov. All right, we're going to start with anyone from Northern California. Again, please raise your hand, or if you are on the telephone, just unmute yourself. Anyone from Northern California? Okay, anyone from Central California? Again, please raise your hand or unmute yourself. All right, anyone from Southern California? raise your hand
Yeah.
or yes.
I've probably been commented out in terms of the written chat notices that I've put out there, but I always have more to say. Never without that. I've heard a lot of discussion about data, and it seems to me that if we're going to talk about data, we ought to be able to get it. The public ought to be able to get it. Now, the AG in spring wrote to various departments, including his, the CADOJ, telling them that they need to be scrupulous in looking at CPRA requests. Well, I have not been able to get the things that I need. And the things that I do get quite often have large swaths of that data purged. And it is purged without explanation. And sometimes data that I should get is simply not given. And people are not responsive to it. What they've said, and they've said it to each other, is that Hilton complains too much and we're going to ignore him. Well, I think that the results of ignoring Hilton have not been positive results. So I again plead to this board and to the members or the people who are employees of the CADOJ to mend their ways. The problem with data is, as Sheriff Bianco said more than a year ago, if the public was aware of its paucity, the public would not stand for it. The second item is about policy. I've spoken about this before in the last meeting. The CHP has used traffic stops as crime deterrent tools in Oakland. They do it simply because Oakland is a high Black density place. So it is easy for them to do it. It is the duty of the California Department of Justice to put a stop to it. So I plead, I beg, I beseech you to attend to that. I think I have nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public from Southern California? No? Okay. Again, thank you to those members of the public that did participate. We will now proceed to vote on the 4 recommendations. And we are going to take each up one by one, starting with the first recommendation. Well, first, let me ask, I want to go back to Board Member Kazi's request earlier on. You know, I don't think we heard much, but just want to revisit your question earlier on, or your request earlier on, wanting to hear from the public. But I think this was more specific to recommendation number 2.
Yeah, it was more about recommendation number 2, but I guess I would like, because we don't have this in front of us, we can't scroll. So I think it'd be nice to have a moment to look at the final language. And I don't think we heard from staff about, other than for recommendation 2, I don't think we heard from staff if there were any other considerations for the other recommendations we should consider.
Okay. So let's go back to the first recommendation, give folks a moment to review this edited version. And I also invite DOJ staff to say anything they wish to say about how this recommendation, or why this recommendation was framed the way it was initially framed or written.
Sure. I'd be happy to discuss just very briefly, and I understand, you know, we are running up against it, so I want to make sure that I'm mindful of everybody's time. With regards to, I think probably the biggest edit this recommendation relates to to removing the ideas or the concepts of the such as that follow from legislature convening a community panel for developing standards, policies, and training. And you can see one, A, B, C, and D. The concept was that based on the research, based on the reports, based on the data, we wanted to direct, the suggestion was to direct whatever panel that was convened to specific areas that are found within the data. So that was the reason why we had articulated, for example, under letter A, the panel should look at use of the least restrictive means of force. That's directly from the research regarding use of force. That's direct from the research regarding the data that we collected. Similarly with letter B, least restrictive means of force while in police custody. And the other recommendations, C and D, have to do with that as well. That there were specific findings or specific portions of the research that had to do with the use of harsh language with youth, the use of making sure that post and law enforcement agencies develop these standards, policies, and training, so that it's not just policies, but also training. So this, I think in terms of this, the reason why we had included those examples was just to direct whatever community panel could be created to particular issues that were found in the report.
Thank you. Co-Chair Guerrero. You're muted.
Alex, I appreciate your thoughtfulness in creating some directions where a panel would go. I think that that leaving it more undirected as it is written invites the legislature or a panel to look back at the report and the information in the report, to reach out to DOJ, or to take into consideration things that we didn't necessarily list out originally, right? I think any look at use of force with respect to what's in the report is going to get at this issue of least restrictive. I mean, especially in light of the International Human Rights Treaty obligations that we have to limit force to that which is necessary and proportionate and takes precaution, which is embedded de-escalation, is non-discriminatory, and is legal. All of those things come into play. So the challenge of making a list is that it either is either you run the risk that it's not exhaustive, or that it's limiting, or that it is overly prescriptive. And so given our the limited action that the legislature has taken on our recommendations, my suggestion is to keep the language as is, not overly prescribe, and give the legislature the agency to determine how to move forward here. We've provided solid ground for them in the report, and provided them the general parameters for what we'd like to see.
Board Member Kazi.
I'd like to understand a bit about that last part you said, I think you said given the limited action the legislature has previously taken on our recommendations. If you could expand on that, because I am inclined to put those back in. I think that the subsections back in, and the reason being is that the legislator created this body, our body, to do some level of studying of the data and do all this research. We have a great narrative section of this report with all the research. And then for us at the end to say, and now create another body, it does read a bit redundant. And so I think it feels to me to be important to say, you created this body, which is us. We have this amazing staff and this amazing board that's done all this research and all this work. And here are some very specific recommendations, but we know that we're not the only voices in the room, and there are all these other incredible voices that need to be considered. So please create another body. To me, that feels better, and I think is a better presentation for this report, and shows why we're doing this work in the first place. But would also like to hear about any experience with them, not really considering any of our recommendations, because again, to summarize, my inclination is to put the subsections back.
Well, you raise a really good point. Why are we asking the legislature to convene what is kind of a parallel structure to the RIPA board? I think that's a valid point, and that was an initial concern that I had. I read this recommendation as asking the legislature to undertake its own study, bring in a panel of experts that could be in the form of a hearing, a legislative hearing, that could be in the form of a legislative convened committee to specifically look at these issues that would inform legislation. And I don't, the A, B, C, and D are problematic in different ways for different reasons, but I think overall they are overly detailed and prescriptive, and I think what we want the legislature to do is to take this issue up, take this recommendation up, and then look back to the body of the report, which is much broader in its description of the kinds of things that should be considered. I think the list is too narrow, and I don't think we need to repeat the report. And I also don't think these are the right recommendations. Because I do human rights work and I have a broader understanding of the use of force issues. These recommendations, or what to look at, are not necessarily consistent with those international obligations and best practices. So I would also just say that, I think the work of the RIPA board is absolutely critical, and it's, I wouldn't be here round two as a board member if I didn't think that was true. I do acknowledge that we've made a lot of recommendations over the last 7 years, and that we've had the best success with the legislature when we've given them a general scope of what we think we should happen, and then they take it up and they consider, and they then do the push and pull of developing legislation. But when it is overly prescriptive, it's not something that appeals to them. And that would be, in my view, the case here. I don't think we need to say all these things. I think if a legislature takes this up, that gets worked out in the legislative push and pull of what gets created and what the scope of that body is.
So hearing that, Board Member Kazi, do you want to maintain your suggestion, or?
No, there was actually something you said about when you were talking, and thank you for all that additional information, and your insight and experience of you and so many others here is so valuable. You said something about they should do this and look back at the report, and I wonder if there's just some language that we can add to, I see Angela nodding. So you had your hand raised if you want to go ahead. And Angela.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think what you're saying, I was thinking maybe just we weave into a reference to our report. Because I think that it is a good point. You know, we want to make sure that you know, we are assuming that this panel will be working with our report, but maybe we need to be, it could be helpful to be explicit, and we could say something like in the very first phrase is could convene a panel of experts to recommend standards, policies, and training for officers as it relates to, it could be the disparities and research set forth in the 2025 RIPA report, including with respect to youth and use of force, de-escalation, and child development. And now we're getting a little bit of wordsmithing, but I don't know if, Armina, is that what you were thinking as well?
Yeah, and you put it in words. I had no leaning on how to do that, but I think your additions are helpful.
Okay.
Great. So I want to note we have 14 minutes left that's scheduled. We have we still need to vote on this and 3 others. If we run up against time, our options are to either extend this meeting or to schedule another meeting. Because of quorum, it's preferential if folks can stay. If we're unable to get through,
we can do it.
Okay, then let's do it.
I think we can do it. And I'm gonna.
I invite a
I'm gonna move
motion
us
on the
forward.
first recommendation.
Yeah, I make a motion that we adopt recommendation number 1 as written on the screen, and I will read it. The legislature should convene a panel of experts to recommend standards, policies, and training for officers as it relates to the disparities in research set forth in the 2025 RIPA report with respect to youth, with a focus on use of force, de-escalation, and child development. Members of the panel should include, at a minimum, affected community members, experts in the development of use of force policies and trainings, child development experts, law enforcement experts, and human rights experts.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Okay, did DOJ capture that? Okay.
Yes. All right. Well, we'll start with the vote and we'll do it in alphabetical order. Board Member Bianco,
Aye.
Board Member Diallo,
Aye.
Board Member Dobard,
You're muted.
oh, you're muted.
Oh, I thought I unmuted. Aye.
Board Member Guerrero,
Aye.
Board Member Kazi,
Aye.
Board Member Randolph,
Aye.
and Board Member Sierra.
Aye.
We move to the ayes have it. Recommendation number 1 has been moved forward to the full board meeting.
Okay. So recommendation 2, I invite a motion here. We already heard from DOJ staff on this one. So when ready, I invite a motion on recommendation 2.
I make a motion to adopt recommendation number 2 as written, and I will read it. The legislature should review the efficacy of existing deflection and diversion programs and explore the expansion to universal deflection and diversion for youth accused of a status offense, misdemeanor, or other low-level offense with a rebuttable presumption of eligibility that can be overcome with evidence-based considerations.
Do we have a second?
Bianco.
Second.
We do have a second. Commencing the voting, Board Member Bianco,
Aye.
Board Member Diallo,
Aye.
Co-Chair Dobard,
Aye.
Co-Chair Guerrero,
Aye.
Board Member Kazi,
Aye.
Board Member Randolph,
Aye.
and Board Member Sierra.
Aye.
Recommendation number 2 has been passed unanimously and will be forwarded to the full board meeting in October.
Okay, recommendation 3. Let me ask board member, going back to board member Kazi's question, is there anything that DOJ wishes to share here on how this recommendation was initially written, keeping it brief as possible?
No, I think there was a comment that this seems to be kind of an explanation. The recommendation is found in the first sentence. The rest of it is more of an explanation.
Okay. I invite a motion.
I make a motion to adopt the recommendation number 3 as written on the screen. I will read it. The legislature, agencies, and municipalities should explore how limiting officer discretion and stops could reduce racial disparities and make specific findings from their study to act on.
Do we have a second?
I will second.
We'll start with the vote. Board Member Bianco,
Aye.
Board Member Diallo,
Aye.
Co-Chair Dobard,
Aye.
Co-Chair Guerrero,
Aye.
Co-Chair Board Member Kazi,
Aye.
Board Member Randolph,
Aye.
and Board Member Sierra.
Aye.
Recommendation number 3 has been passed unanimously and will be forwarded to the full board in October.
Okay, moving on to recommendation 4. Again, anything that DOJ staff wish to share in terms of how this was initially written that hasn't already been shared.
No, I don't believe so. Thank you.
Okay, I invite a motion.
I move that we adopt recommendation number 4 as written on the screen, and I will read it. The board recommends that law enforcement agencies reevaluate proactive policing practices that have a disparate impact and should collaborate with community-based organizations to find alternatives to increase public safety.
We have a second.
I will second.
Right. We'll commence the vote on recommendation number 4. Board Member Bianco,
Aye.
Board Member Diallo,
Aye.
Co-Chair Dobard,
Aye.
Co-Chair Guerrero,
Aye.
Board Member Kazi,
Aye.
Board Member Randolph,
Aye.
and Board Member Sierra.
Aye.
Recommendation number 4 has also been voted on unanimously and will be forwarded to the full board meeting in October. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So I think that concludes our work here. I want to thank my fellow board members, the public, and DOJ staff for all your time, energy, and effort into getting us this far. That's it, and I invite a motion for us to adjourn.
I move to adjourn with with an appreciation for Co-Chair Dobard, who led us through long and very effective conversation. Thank you so much. This was really well run. Appreciate you. I think my motion needs a second.
We have a second.
I will second.
And DOJ, do we?
Is the meeting adjourned? We don't need a voice vote on that, but a
Okay.
consensus to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Right.
Thank you, folks. Have a great day.
Thank you.